Want to kind of get things rolling. I want to respect everybody here that give them time to get in, since we were right at 2:01 Eastern time, but respect that I know our speaker today has a bit of a tight timeline. So for those of us that have joined us, welcome. We're glad to see you all back with us this week. So this is the second installment in the Hemp Feed Coalition's monthly research-driven webinar series. I'm Kristine Ely, and I'm your moderator once again for today's session. So each month, a little bit of an introduction, each month we're featuring live presentations from experts across the industry, followed by time for you all to ask questions and for us to have a lively discussion. Now, for those of you that might be catching us after the fact, if you can't join us live this week or another week, don't worry, we record every session so you can catch it whenever it fits into your schedule. So before we kick things off, Wendy Mosher, President and CEO of New West Genetics, which is a seed genetics company providing innovative genetics to the hemp industry since 2014, and Vice President of the Hemp Feed Coalition Advisory Board, would like to share a few words with you all. So please, Wendy, the floor is yours.
So as Kristine said, I'm Vice President of the Board of HFC. I've been working with Hemp Feed Coalition on and off since its inception in 2017. This grew out of an effort that was mandated by state legislators and enacted through the Colorado Department of Ag, drew together multiple industry stakeholders, experts in feed, veterinarians, Cattlemen's Association, AFCO, as well as FDA, and from that, Hemp Feed Coalition was born. So we are a 501c3 organization that has a mission to increase feed nutrition options, sustainable feed production, as well as increase markets for our industry, which is hemp. So you may have heard it's essential in ag to utilize as many byproducts as possible of a crop. This is especially true in our instance as we are a new crop. So what we do is just as valuable to the grain side as it is to the fiber side. And it's also a really innovative opportunity for animal feed mills as well as CPG brands. So what exactly does Hemp Feed Coalition do? We directly submit applications to regulators for the approval of hemp grain in animal feed. And then we respond with support for any needed clinical trials to enable those applications. So we were the lead consortium that achieved the first FDA recognized use of hemp seed meal in laying hens, as well as AFCO approved ingredient definition of that. And there's folks on the call who greatly aided that effort. That was extensive and expensive work, especially because it was the first application. We've developed a great working relationship with the FDA through that process, and now subsequent applications will be much more expedient. And our next submission is on track is for hemp seed meal and ruminants. So really exciting momentum happening with the organization. One last piece, I want to call out and thank our existing members. Thank you so much. We can't do this without you, without the full industry support. And again, what we do can be costly. So we ask everyone else on the call, if you're not a member yet, please do show your support. We have leveled memberships, and we have other ways you can show support too, including in-kind donations. For instance, we at New West have donated marketing support in the past in the form of hours of our marketer, as well as scientific expertise on applications. So there's a few ways that we can work with you. Use of funds are really efficient, I would say. So it goes directly to our wonderful application scientist and writer, Kristine, is one instance, as well as for any additional analytics and trials FDA may call for. So again, please consider supporting, become a member, go to hempfeedcoalition.org, not for profit, so all your donations are tax deductible. And that's my spiel. On to Mr. Bookout.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It was a great overview for HFC and what they do. So for those of you that have just joined us and weren't with us last week, I want to remind you all and let you know that if you have questions, please enter those into the chat and I'll be sure to read them and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. All right, so Today's speaker is Mr. Bill Bookout, President, Board Chair, and a founding member of the National Animal Supplement Council, or NASC, the world's leading trade association representing manufacturers and suppliers of health and nutritional supplements for dogs, cats, and horses. He has been an advocate for the animal supplement industry for over 2 decades and is recognized as a leading expert on regulatory issues surrounding these types of products. He has testified on behalf of the industry at FDA public meetings, was selected to serve on the Health Canada Expert Advisory Committee for veterinary natural health products, and has participated in countless educational programs, legal forums, regulatory trainings, trade events, and professional meetings. Currently, he serves the American Pet Products Associations as pet food consultant and sits on several AFCO committees. In addition, he serves on the Hemp Feed Coalition Advisory Board. Mr. Bookout earned his bachelor's in physical sciences from the University of Wyoming and his MBA, sorry, my computer just glitched, his MBA from Pepperdine University Presidents and Key Executives Program. He and his wife, Mary, divide their time between Arizona and Alaska, where they live with their 2 rescue cats, Marmalade and Yanaha. Please welcome Mr. Bookout as he presents long-term CBD safety study in dogs, why, results, and predictions.
So make sure technology is great when it works. But when Andrew asked me to speak, first I want to thank for the opportunity. Asked me to speak on our safety study, which was a long-term CBD safety study in dogs, why we did it, results. And I'm not going to just give you the highlights of the study. You can read that. I'll give you a link to the study. And what I'm going to do here is try to give you some behind the scenes, inside baseball insight as to why we structured the study the way we did, things that led up to structuring the study, how much it cost, and what the results were. And then I'll take a little bit of a look at predicting the future. So let me advance one slide. So that should say thank you. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thanks for the invitation from the Hemp Feed Coalition, particularly Andy Bish and Kristine. Thanks for being moderator, and also really appreciate the attendees. So this is the National Animal Supplement Council, our 25th anniversary. So we were started in 2001. I'm one of the founders of NASC. Had my own company, made every mistake you can possibly make. Didn't have hemp or CBD at that time, but did have products that were similar to human dietary supplements. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. But my contact information is at the end of the webinar. So if anybody has any questions, and even if you're not an NASC member, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to speak to you. As Wendy said, thanks, Wendy, for the nice introduction and overview of HFC. I have the honor and privilege to also help HFC from the beginning back in 2017 when we got that off the ground. So for this presentation, I've split it into 4 parts. I want to talk about just a brief background of NASC. So for the people who are not familiar with the National Animal Supplement Council, I'll give you just a few high points, one slide, and then our involvement with hemp and CBD. Why did we do the safety study, and what was the driving forces behind that? The publication and results, and I'll give some selected data from the study or key points from the data, but I've also got some new and updated information from our adverse event reporting system, which is also quoted in the data and the summary of the study. But I've got fresh data that was run from new risk reports on February 15th. I'll show you that, and I'll give you some key takeaways, summary, and then what everybody wants is I'll try to do the crystal ball thing and predict the future. What is the future for hemp and any hemp derivatives, cannabinoids look like, and then leave time for question and answer. I'm coming to you live from Dulles Airport, just outside of our nation's capital. And so my flight's not until 5:30 Eastern time. So I don't have a push on the back end. So I'm not time crunched, but we'll try to keep it within the 45 minutes. So section 1, brief background of NASC and our involvement with hemp and CBD. NASC is also a nonprofit. We're a 501c6, not a C3, which means your contributions or members' dues are not tax deductible. They are deductible as business expenses, but we're an educationally driven association. We have about 320 brands that we represent, and we also have complete supply chain management, including raw material suppliers for CBD, hemp, and cannabis derivatives. We recommend regulatory policy for non-nutritional health supplements. I'll expand a little bit on that in a couple slides and tell you what that means. Or food supplements. Food supplements are regulated by the states, typically the Department of Agriculture. FDA has ultimate regulatory authority. FDA, Center for Veterinary Medicine, specifically food and drugs, right? So we focus only on non-human food chain animals. I did help with the hemp approval process. Was kudos to HFC for leading that charge on that, and that's a great job by HFC and everybody involved, particularly Andrew Morgan. A lot of people contributed to that, Raj. So we only do non-human food chain animals, primarily in the marketplace. It's dogs, cats, and horses. We just had a webinar last week that we're going to now expand into treats, which are regulated as food. If you learn about treats, the webinar was posted and it's on our website. You can shoot on our website and see that complete webinar that we did a week ago. We don't do complete and balanced diets, so anything in bags or cans. We don't focus on products that are similar to human dietary supplements. That's our strike zone. We again did announce the treat program at the AFCO mid-year meeting in New Orleans, that we were going to expand our scope into treats, which are food, right? So functional treats, that's a red flag. So treats are regulated as food. If you have any function other than taste, aroma, nutritional value, technical effect, or mechanical and abrasive action, it's AFCO. That will define your regulatory path, and hemp is an unapproved ingredient for use in food, with the exception of laying hens. Other things are in process, but they're not completed yet. We've always embraced these issues with a transparent process, working with states, working with FDA, Center for Veterinary Medicine, and also AFCO. And our approach has been one of co-regulation, not self-regulation, because without the assistance of regulators, giving input, even if sometimes it's unofficial, or taking action against egregious violators that make, all of us look bad because the industries get painted with a broad brush. So we work transparently and cooperatively with the regulatory agencies through co-regulation, not self-regulation. So what do? We help promote regulatory and facilitate prioritization of regulatory compliance. Bad actors, right? Everybody's concerned about bad actors because, we don't want to be viewed as, in that group. We want to foster a uniform regulatory environment, enhance compliance, and provide ongoing education. Again, like this, appreciate the opportunity, and promote expeditious, equitable, consistent application of enforcement. Because again, 95% of industries can do the right things right and have the greatest of intention, but it's the few companies out there that can make us all look bad, and they're concerned. So as Wendy also alluded to, we've been involved in the hemp and CBD issue from the jump. 2014, the first Farm Bill passes. 2017, as Wendy alluded to, there was a committee by the Colorado Department of Agriculture with Hollis Glenn that really championed, is there a basis for submitting nutritional benefits and having hemp approved as a nutritionally beneficial ingredient for various species of animals? And the results of that committee was, yes, there is, and so we should pursue that process. Hemp really didn't take off until 2018. There was a lot of misunderstanding, I think still is somewhat, about hemp and especially CBD. So consumer demand started to increase. Now, I testified at FDA. The next slide will talk about that. But, a lot of people misunderstand or misinterpret or don't want to understand the limits of what the Farm Bill did. So the Farm Bill legitimized and legalized the growing of the agricultural commodity, and that's overseen by USDA. It did not legalize the marketing of products. So when you introduce an article of commerce to the marketplace, that shifts to FDA, right? And so it's important to recognize growing of the agricultural commodity, that's what the Farm Bill did, still does. But marketing of products, that's where the rub comes in, right? So hemp at that time was an unapproved ingredient for use in animal food, since been approved for laying hens. Again, thanks to the efforts of HFC, it's still not approved for other species. So hemp in animal food or nutritional products, whether they're complete and balanced diets or supplements or toppers or any other food product, it's limited at this time and not approved for other species other than laying hens. I testified in FDA in May of 2019, 31 May, at the request of FDA. So there was a whole bunch of speakers there, including me. The outcome of that was CVM really came back and said it was going to take 2 to 3 years for them to come up with a program. Now, remember, this is pre-COVID. So COVID pushed the timeframes back even further and, further delayed the process. But we came back after the meeting and we said, listen, we're going to come back to CVM by the end of the year, December. And we're going to put together what we believe is a responsible path forward, because the industry can't wait 2 to 3 years for the agency to come up with, here's what we think the recommended policies are through rulemaking or whatever the situation. So, the marketplace and market demand and industry's response really shortened that time frame. And that's exactly what we did. So we came back to FDA and we presented, and we still follow this today, although it's changed, which we'll talk about with the legislation that was signed in November. But we have current good manufacturing practice standards. Our current good manufacturing practice standards are a hybrid standard. And this is NASD standards, but they're based on 21 CFR Part 111, that's human dietary supplement CGMPs, including components of 21 CFR Part 507, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act for animal food, specifically in the areas of preventive controls and food safety plans. So our standards are a hybrid standard, but the reason that we took 111 and 507 and came up with, a 111 plus, if you will, because the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act doesn't apply to animal products, but the government was familiar with CGMPs, and so we didn't reinvent the wheel, right? So we have CGMPs. We also have ingredient testing and verification requirements. THC levels at that time have to be below 0.3%. Raw materials and finished products, CBD if stated has to be verified. So you got to meet label claims you do with anything else throughout the expiration date of the product. Microbial contamination and testing for heavy metals and pesticides. As we all know, hemp is a sponge plant, so it's susceptible to, various things. So quality always starts with, quality raw materials. If you don't have quality raw materials, you're not going to have quality products. So raw material verification and vendor qualifications are also important. Claims review, you got to limit your claims because they have to be within those allowable parameters that we've discussed with FDA. I'll talk more about that and show you the law in a second. And then adverse event reporting and continuous vigilance. In the absence of safety studies, which a lot of these products have, now we do have a safety study for CBD in dogs, and that's what we're talking about here. But at that time, there wasn't anything, right? And safety studies are still limited because they're expensive, as you'll see. So post-market surveillance is extremely important. I would argue, and I did in our study, that no matter how rigorously defined a study is, your statistical population is limited. We had 32 dogs in the study, but when you get a product out in the as an article of commerce and you are administering, or people are buying, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of administrations of these products, no matter how rigorously defined a safety study is, you can potentially encounter things that you didn't find in the study, right? So post-market surveillance is extremely important. Here's what the law says. So NASD does allow the marketing of CBD or products containing hemp in animal health supplements, not in animal nutritional supplements. So here's what the law says under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. In section 201G1B says, this is the red zone, you got to stay out of here. So first and foremost, the regulatory pathway of how products are regulated is defined by the intended use or benefit statements on the labeling or extensions of labeling. So that's not the only reason, but it's the first consideration. So here's your first big takeaway, right? You can't make any disease claims. That's for approved drugs. Epidiolex helps kids with epilepsy, right? So you can't mention cancer. You can't mention arthritis, chronic pain, any chronic condition, dermatitis. That's reserved for approved drugs under G1B, articles intended to diagnose, prevent, treat, or cure. 201G1C says articles other than food, okay? You can read that as other than nutritionally beneficial. I didn't give you the definitions for food because it's not approved. However, articles other than food, health supplements, intended, emphasis added, to affect the structure and or function of the body or man or other animals. So you can support healthy joint function. You can help with discomfort in older animals. You can help maintain normal mobility, normal flexibility of cartilage, viscosity of synovial fluid, normal calm demeanor. And there's guidance documents out there for structure function claims, all right? So that's a subset of technically drug definitions under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Not allowed in food, still isn't, with the exception of laying hens, based on the efforts or due to the efforts of HFC. So I'll talk about supporting, trade associations like HFC, because they're really the champion. You're champions in the industry, especially in this particular area with hemp. So why did we do a long-term safety study or CBD in dogs? The short answer is FDA said they wanted to see a long-term study. So we communicate with FDA routinely. When I was out here in DC this time, we talked to FDA about every 6 months or so. FDA, Tim Schell, who's the director of CVM, is going to speak at our meeting in May. And I'll give you a little bonus here. If anybody on this webinar wants to attend our annual conference, which is in Phoenix, May 19, 2021, even if you're not an NASC member, if you want to come to the conference and you've taken the time to attend this session here and the HFC learning sessions, you will let you register as a member. So if you want to register, send me an email, tell me you want to register, I'll sign you off as a member. So as a bonus for attending the session here, you want to come to the NASC conference, you're welcome. You can attend as a member again, May 19, 2021. So we asked FDA, what would you consider long-term? And they said at least 90 days, right? So FDA said we thought the substances were safe based on the data that we have, but they said they want to see a full-on, placebo-controlled study. And so FDA's greatest concern always is safety. They're a safety-first organization, and that's reasonable, right? So the NASC Board of Directors authorized us to pursue, through a contract research organization, the safety study. It was a 90-day study. There were 32 dogs split into 4 groups. I'll talk about the mix in a minute, but we looked at CBD, we looked at CBDA, we looked at CBDG, and then we had a control group. 90-day study, plus there was a 2-week washout period at the end. The goal was not to identify, it wasn't an LD50 study. And so the goal was not to identify a toxic level, because we're not going to kill animals or euthanize animals to demonstrate something is safe, right? So this was a study to demonstrate that these substances, in our opinion, do not pose undue risk, at least in dogs, and we think to other non-human food chain animals, dogs, cats, and horses. That's really where the market exists, especially for CBD. Cost, as Wendy said, there's cost associated with everything, like it or not, and this cost of this study was just under $500,000, which we funded on behalf of our members. So you want to know where your money goes and where it's invested and how wisely it's invested, you look at HFC. They have approval in an ingredient definition, and they're working on other approvals in ingredient definition. So I'll encourage you again to support the organizations that are driving these processes forward and achieving solutions that benefit all of us, not least importantly the animals, by the way. So publication results and selected data from the study. Again, I said I wasn't going to read the study, but I'm going to give you the highlights, right? And this is kind of some of the inside baseball stuff. So when you do a study, it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, in the 4 groups that we talked about, or that I illustrated on the previous slide, and we submitted the study for publication to JAVMA, which is the AVMA publication, and they declined it, even though it was a solid study and it was peer-reviewed. So we submitted to Frontiers in Veterinary Science, and they published the study on the 29th of February in 2024. I've got the link at the end, so you can, it's free. Anybody can view it, and you can click on the link, and you've got the complete study. But I'm going to give you a few of the highlights. Again, it was a 90-day study. There was a 14-day recovery period. 32 beagles. There were 16 males, 16 females. They were randomized into 4 groups. Again, CBD, A, G, and a control group. The dose rate was 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight per day. Why did we pick that number? Well, we got about 130 companies that have CBD products, including one of the leaders in this area, Elevet, with a lot of research through Joe Washlag, and he's a professor at Cornell. So through the data in our system and also input from people who were in the industry, a lot of people who had done and invested in research, we felt like we could go to 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight and wouldn't cause any negative health consequences. So we didn't want to set ourselves up for failure. And again, it wasn't a lethal dose study. It was demonstrate that these substances don't pose undue risk to animals within the parameters that we define. So we came up with 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight per day, and that's how we did it. We thought that was a level that we were comfortable with in running this study, because you don't want to roll the dice with $500,000 and think you're going to fail, right? So we were pretty confident, based on the data that we have, especially from our adverse event reporting system, we'd have a good result, or we thought we would. But it was, it was a roll of the dice, and when you submit, whatever happens in that study, good or bad, you're going to have to publish it and let it go. So, we were pretty confident that it was going to be a positive outcome, but that wasn't at all guaranteed. So we were rolling the dice to a certain extent with 500 grand, right? That's no small number. The animals were observed daily. They had detailed clinical exams weekly, including blood work, and then they were monitored for 14 days after dosing for the duration of the study. So that was a 14-day washout period to show that, the blood values, liver, kidney values, everything remained within normal limits, and returned, so there wasn't any long-term or long-lasting effects on the washout period. So these are a couple direct quotes right from the study. Cannabinoids were well tolerated in the conclusion when healthy male and female beagles were dosed for 90 days. Post-market surveillance data, our adverse event reporting system, the NAC NEAR system, is the most advanced system in the world for these types of products. And I've got current data, but at that time, we submitted, there was over 1 billion administrations, just over, of products containing hemp or hemp derivatives. So we can cut that data down to CBD, but if you look at the top level with hemp, if you don't have any significant adverse events or significant, negative consequences at the top level with hemp, you're probably not going to have that with the derivatives like CBD, AG, anything. But we can cut that data more finely than the data that we have overall for hemp. So we submitted data included in the study that we had from 2010 to 2023. There was a report rate. We had about, per 1 million administrations, about 2 adverse events, and I'll show you the definitions for those on another slide. But about one adverse event in 2 million. And then for serious adverse events, it was 1 in 10 million, or it's either 10 million or 100 million, 10's hundreds, either 100 million. It was statistically insignificant. So based on the results of the study, along with other published studies that we also included and referenced, the data from extensive post-market surveillance data, hemp and hemp-derived compounds, it was concluded that they were very well tolerated in healthy dogs at these levels, which 5 mg per kg per day. So NEAR's data, again, our system is the most advanced system in the world for post-market surveillance and risk management of these types of products. Currently, our system includes over 7,000 products, not just hemp, but I'll show you how many products have hemp in them, but 7,000 products that are similar to human dietary supplements or health supplements, also nutritional supplements. Over 1,400 unique ingredients, hemp and derivatives, are also included in our system. And they're analyzed through statistical analysis and the algorithms of the program for milligrams per kilogram body weight of all the different ingredients that are currently in the marketplace compared against adverse events, both serious and non-serious. And then total adverse events are reported by species. And again, I'll give you some examples. So this is from an ingredient risk report that we ran for this presentation. It's a live system. So this was run on the 15th of February at 2 o'clock, 2 a.m. East Coast time, for hemp and hemp-derived compounds. The number of registered products in our system from NASC members, 1,432 products. It's been in the market for 17 years. And then the data, and there's year-by-year data, but I just took the summaries here. So for dogs, adverse events were 3,073 adverse events. That's about two per million adverse events. 32 serious adverse events. That's a very small number in 1.4 billion administrations. We say it again, 1.4 billion administrations of products containing hemp or hemp-derived compounds. That's statistically insignificant in terms of adverse events. Now, people say, and FDA said to me, well, what about underreporting? I said, okay, multiply adverse events by 10, multiply it by 100, cut the administrations by half. It's still statistically insignificant, right? So that's the data for dogs. Data for horses, not nearly as much for horses. You know, it's not an approved ingredient, and, you know, CBD especially is not as prevalent in horses because it's an expensive ingredient. You know, so there's some economic factors here, but adverse events in horses, 51, little higher administration rate because there's not as many, but 5 serious adverse events, again, as we define them. I'll show you that in a slide or two here. In, you know, 8 million, almost 9 million administrations. Cats, 165, that's under 1 per million administrations. 5 serious adverse events, again, very small number in 230 million administrations. So the data and the administrations, as you have seen in dogs and in cats, are significant, but not insignificant in horses. Almost 9 million administrations, right? Total, everything, all species, 3,289 adverse events. That's about 2 adverse events in a million administrations. 42 serious, still a very small number statistically. 1.6 billion administrations of products containing hemp or cannabis derivatives in the marketplace through our system. And again, remember, our system is a live system. So this data is updated continuously, month to month, quarter to quarter. We have both a numerator and denominator, adverse events compared to number of products. It says sold, that really means shipped. We don't care about dollars, we care about the units, and, you know, how many units are shipped, how many are consumed, and what quantities are in each individual, you know, dosage unit, if you will. So here's how we, you know, there's a disclaimer. Here's how the data is calculated. If you have any questions, here's the phone number. You can call us. These data are only available to NASC members, so anybody can't get in and run it. But if somebody in HFC needed data from our system, we'd certainly, you know, be happy to support any of the ingredient definition submissions or anything else through data in our system. So, but FDA does have access to some of the NERS data. It's limited access, but they do have access, as well as state regulators. And ingredient risk reports like these are also recognized, and the NASC systems are recognized in the formerly Veterinary Natural Health Products Program in Canada. I was on that committee a long time ago that put together that foundational approach now to the Natural Health Products Program. But the Canadian Food and Drugs Act, which is the equivalent in Canada of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in the States, references specifically our system and ingredient risk reports as one component of consideration when they consider adding an ingredient to the list of acceptable substances. So data is power. Adverse events are defined. Adverse event, we cast the net very broadly: vomiting or diarrhea, anything that could be self-resolving, even if it's not due to the use of the product. So remember, when an adverse event's reported, maybe it's not due to the use of the product. The system requires, or there's forms in there to evaluate an adverse event, decide if it is due to the use of the product, and do you need to take corrective action. So we cast the net broadly. Even transient events like vomiting or diarrhea are counted. Serious adverse events has to be, you can't be diagnosed by a consumer. You gotta think you got a serious adverse event. Got to have a veterinarian involved, and it's an incapacitating event, you know, and it may resolve itself, it may not, but can't be diagnosed by a layperson, right? It's got to have a professional involved veterinarian. Okay, so remember how adverse events are defined. Again, all adverse events, we cast the net broadly. Serious adverse events requires professional diagnosis and involvement. Key takeaways in summary in predicting the future, and then we'll go to Q&A. So again, I emphasize data is power, right? You know, it's pretty hard for FDA to come back and say, I think, based on the data that we have, you know, these substances pose undue risk to animals in the species that we primarily target: dogs, cats, and horses. I think based on the data, both in the study, these substances certainly are clearly demonstrated they don't pose undue risk to dogs, even with the long-term safety study and the other post-market surveillance data that we have. Provided again, THC is below 0.3%, contaminants are verified and tested for on the raw material side. And, hemp should be pursued, and we are pursuing through HFC's efforts primarily, approval for other species. So again, kudos to HFC and, spearheading these processes. And again, trade associations like HFC are the champions of the industry. So collective efforts are, hey, when I say this study cost $500,000, which it did, any company out there got 500 grand, you want to throw at the, safety study? Well, if everybody helps, contribute, then nobody has to, do all the heavy lifting, right? Because one of the downsides is when ingredients are approved, it's, people that didn't help bake the bread can help you eat the bread. And that's just the way it works. I don't think it's necessarily fair, but that's how it works. So, if we all help a little, we can achieve great things. And that's, I think, clearly demonstrated by some of the data and the efforts, primarily of HFC and also NASC. So I encourage everybody to support the efforts. All right. So what's the current situation? So we kind of have an unfortunate set of circumstances for animal products. So the bill that opened the U.S. government was signed on November 12th, and in that package was a provision limiting THC to 0.4 milligrams per package. So that bill started a time clock. We have a year to deal with that. So really, where did that come from? It came from the concern on the human side that, kids might, consume a bunch of products and get high or have drinks or something like that. So, it said that they're limited to 0.4 milligrams. Well, it's unintended consequences. So it's overreach by the human industry, which I'll talk about on the next slide, and unintended consequences by the U.S. government, in which that happens, unfortunately, in a lot of legislative, discussions and passing of bills and statutes, whether it's a state level or the federal level, in, wherever. So unintended consequences are a real thing. But that started the time clock that we got to, shoot to this point unless we can do something, and we're working on extending the time frames for that. But, the other ridiculous part is there's not really even the analytical methodologies to, assure that these very, very limited levels are met. So, you define a level that you really can't test for or substantiate. That's a problem. So we're working on that, but it did start the time clock, and the trip date is November 12th, 2026. So that fuse is burning, and a lot of people are working on to get that extended. There's the bottom line, and I said it's an unfortunate set of circumstances for animal products. I think that we have unintended consequences by the United States Congress. I don't think they ever considered animals. They didn't consider impact. I think there was overreach by the human dietary supplement industry. I tried to speak up and encourage them, some of the people that, there was risk in this, but they wanted to include Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10 THC, and they wanted to include, in drinks and other foods like power bars and, snack foods and things like that. And that's where really where Congress flared and said, listen, kids could go out and get high. Well, I've never heard of anybody eating an animal product or an animal soft chew or a liquid, and then having, somebody get high on animal products. They don't taste good, for one thing. So, what the human industry should have done, in my view, that I expressed this, but, I was not a lone voice, but they didn't listen, by the way. That I think if they would have limited their efforts to human dietary supplement products, they'd have been much more receptive, Congress, that is. And they'd have been, had a much greater probability of success, but that didn't happen. So I think it was, unintended consequences by Congress and overreach from the human industry that the animal industry got caught up in the negatives associated with these nets. Unfortunate, but that's the situation. So what are we doing about it? Well, NASC and HFC are both working on reasonable solutions, both for approvals as well as extending the time frames on this 0.4 milligrams THC. I would encourage you to stay informed for sure, but also get involved, as Wendy said. Support the organizations that are being the champion. If we all pull on the rope in the same direction, and we're not all firing individually, right, spraying like shotgun blasts, and some pellets hit and a lot of them miss. we all pull on the rope in the same direction, speak with a unified voice, I think we'd accomplish great things. And I think the results have certainly demonstrated that, both with NASC as well as HFC. Here's some references, Frontiers in Veterinary Science. These are just references that I've, included here and there. Some of the older stuff, but, where Scott Gottlieb at FDA, said these substances are not approved, but, the problem is FDA didn't do anything. And so now that you can't get that toothpaste back in the tube. So look at those references. Again, the slides will be made available. The recording will be made available. If you do have questions, here's my contact information. I'm in and out of the office, but send me an email. Don't worry about it. If you're not an NASC member, I'll still talk to you and try to help you. If I can't, phone number, email is probably best, but if you want to give me a call, don't hesitate. So really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again to everybody in HFC. It's an honor and a privilege to be associated. Wendy said HFC is the A team, and I certainly agree. So thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate everyone attending.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that really fascinating presentation. I know I learned a lot.
Good.
So I just want to remind you all that if you have questions for Bill, please put them in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to read those. I did have a couple myself, so I'll kick that off, and then I will get into audience member questions. But
and Wendy, I hope you're on here, because if there's any hard questions, I'm going to throw them to you.
No thanks.
So Bill, I'm kind of curious, since you have, it sounds like, or have ongoing conversations with the FDA prior to your study, and since I think it's been 2 years since you got it published.
Yep.
What additional research do you feel is necessary to build that confidence in cannabinoid safety? And you can target this towards, pets, since that's, where this all was focused on today.
Well, for inclusion in animal food, the FDA wants to see both safety data as well as utility data. And, HFC is the approval for hemp in laying hens really established. First of all, it was a learning experience, right? It took quite a while to get that done, but we learned from that process. And so subsequent submissions will be faster. Now, when you talk about faster, what does that mean? You're dealing with the government, so that's all relative, right? But I think we've established a roadmap and a lot of lessons learned from that experience, so we can continue to have submissions in other species. But you've got to demonstrate safety, limiting CBD, THC. Those are components, but also utility, which for an animal food, and I didn't put this in the presentation, but benefits should be taste, aroma, nutritional value or contribution, like protein, fiber, essential fatty acids, omega-3, 6, 9, like hemp seed oil, things like that. So safety, utility, and production processes are the basics, I think, of submissions and the hurdles you have to clear for approvals.
That's great. That kind of actually answers my second question, where I was going to ask, and so I'll just clarify for those in the audience, really trying to dig into the conversation and difference between pets versus livestock and the challenges they're facing to get the hemp feed product approval. I will follow up with that, though. So, FDA set guidelines for laying hens as far as tolerable cannabinoids and such, with kind of the guise of, concerns for the human food chain, where our pets are not intended into the human food chain. Do you think they'll still follow that same kind of strict guidelines? Do you think there'll be more flexibility in that and wiggle room almost to kind of, since, there's less concern?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and also very astute observation. I think you're exactly right. So anytime you introduce a substance into the production animals, where you could have, post-consumption concerns, which, and that's why NASC focuses on non-human food chain animals, dogs, cats, and horses. I know in Canada, horses can be a human food source, but, that's, there's ways to deal with that, like mutant drugs and things, washout periods and so forth. But yes, what you said is correct. I think there's less concern with non-human food chain animals. There's not no concern, but there's less concern. and for health supplements, all the products, whether it's a joint product with glucosamine, chondroitin, and MSM, or hemp or CBD, those products are marketed under enforcement discretion now, provided the company acts responsibly. And so that's where NASC comes in. We're the interface between the industry and the government to make sure we stay ahead of the regulatory curve, act responsibly so that FDA or state regulators have faith, trust, and confidence in our go forward plan. But when you talk about animals in the human food chain, then there is more a higher degree of scrutiny and rigor involved in gaining approvals in the production animals because of secondary consumption concerns, rightly or wrongly. Right.
Yeah. And then just one more question, then I will move on to audience questions. Is there any talk from kind of FDA what they're thinking, kind of target levels in pets would be, or is that conversation not really been, and this is in looking at on the feed side of things, or, I know the layperson won't be in those conversations. So,
Right.
I'm curious, is that conversation happening?
The short answer is I don't know. The answer from NASC is we're not pursuing approval for either dog, cat, or horse food products. And as you probably, as you're certainly aware, the HFC people and probably other people on this call, FDA had a memorandum of understanding with AFCO, and primarily that was for expedited approval processes through their ingredient definitions committee. That's where hemp went to be approved or submitted FDA's final approval authority. But through the ingredient definitions committee, that's where the hemp for laying hens went, and that pathway, and it got approved. There was an investigator, Felina Hutchinson from Montana, that was the AFCO investigator, but HFC did most of the heavy lifting, and it took quite a while to get there. But the MOU with FDA and AFCO was not renewed. So there's another program that AFCO is trying to get off the ground in a partnership with Kansas State for ingredient approvals, so they can continue to submit ingredient approvals. Would that be a viable option for hemp in other species? Maybe. I think it certainly should be considered and explored, but ultimately, the decision rests with FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. So, long-winded answer to a short question. NASC is not pursuing approval in food products for dogs, cats, and horses, and they allow hemp and CBD in health supplements, not nutritional. Remember, G1C, articles other than food, right? So we can use hemp and CBD in health supplements, not nutritional supplements or food supplements.
Excellent. Well, really great information. I'm gonna switch over since we've got about 10 minutes left we have a few questions that have come in from the audience. So Justin asks, what have you seen in terms of bioavailability for the CBD and CBG by themselves? He has seen some research suggesting that CBD is not absorbed well by dogs without the addition of the acid alongside it.
Yeah, good question, and we don't evaluate that. So NASC does not evaluate efficacy questions for anything. If we evaluated safety and efficacy, we'd be FDA. So we haven't evaluated the efficacy, bioavailability. Does it help with certain, targeted whatever, whether it's cognitive function or discomfort. So that's not something that we evaluate. And again, you got to be careful of that, because if you want an ingredient approved as a food ingredient, an ingredient to be included as animal food, the intended use is important. So if anybody wants to submit an approval for an ingredient, you got to make sure that it's taste, aroma, nutritional contribution, or technical effect like a preservative, because if it's anything other than that, FDA is going to tell you, go submit a new animal drug approval, right? So you got to be careful. It's intended use. Remember, the law says intended use. So you have to substantiate the nutritional benefit. So again, long-winded answer to a short question, Justin, we haven't evaluated the bioavailability or uptake on CBD or or anything else. That's not what we do. But there is some research on that. I think there's been a lot of research from Joe Washleg and Cornell. So there is information and studies out there on to answer those questions or help answer those questions.
Great answer. Clyde asks, is there any effort in the area of aquaponics, which before I let you answer, it looks like Wendy has added a few comments. I know that there is some research in aquaponics that they are there's 5-year study. So unless you're looking at any other additional, is there anything in the pet fish food market that utilizes hemp? No, I'm just curious.
Yeah, not that I know of. There's the MUMS bill out there that is in existence now. Minor uses, minor species. That's where fish would come under. So a little bit different, but we don't do anything in aquaponics.
Fabulous. All right. Andrea asks, do you see the feedstock for layers to be updated to include hemp seed oil, whole grain screenings? And do you see a change to allow for meat and broiler birds? I could take a stab at this kind of on the, before you as well.
Sure.
To include additional feedstuff products, as of right now, I believe you have to submit a whole new application in laying hens. And same thing with meat and broilers. You would have to submit a separate application, I believe. I think they're trying to develop a system to kind of make that a more streamlined process. Does that sound about right, Bill?
That is right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's always harder to clear the first hurdle, right? Like anything else. Once you've done it once, then you learn the lessons, of hard knocks sometimes, and don't make those mistakes again, right? So subsequent approvals, I think, will take place more expeditiously than the first ones because we learned a lot along the way. And why did HFC pursue laying hens or production animals? Bigger market, there's more economic benefit, bigger market, and especially when you're dealing with, byproducts, it was better for the industry to start on the production or food animal side, right? So, one step at a time. But subsequent approvals should be more rapid than the first ones because we learned a lot.
I would agree, and I'm excited to see those efforts move forward. So does anybody else have any? I'm not seeing any additional questions pop up in the Q&A. Kind of doing a last call. Any additional questions? There have been some comments added to your question, Clyde, so make sure you take a look at that.
But again, I hope this was helpful and you came with knowing a little bit more than before it started. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or something comes to mind later. A lot of good resources with people on the call in HFC. So thank you again.
Well, I've got one more question, so you're not off the hook quite yet. They snuck it in. So the question is, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, do you believe cannabinoids in companion animal health will ultimately be regulated more like feed ingredients, veterinary drugs, or supplements? And what would the practical implications of each pathway be for manufacturers and veterinarians?
Well, that's a good question. It's undetermined, but I can tell you NASC is working on, and you'll keep an eye out for some press releases near term. What do I mean by near term? Probably within a month, certainly by Global Pet Expo. But it's going to take, I think, legislatively driven solutions in some cases to address both these substances as well as other substances or products on the animal side that are similar to human dietary supplements, because the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act does not apply to animals. So there needs to be a permanent home for these products. NASC is working on that, and cannabinoids, we're working real hard to get cannabinoids and hemp included. But again, remember, it's the intended use or benefit. So, but it's going to take legislation to completely solve this at some point.
All right. And then one more question popped up, and it's a little long. So for Senate Bill 2102. So beginning on July 1st of 26, it authorizes hemp-derived feed ingredients in certain commercial animal feeds. I don't know if this is in Hawaii specifically. Authorizes the use of hemp and hemp-derived feed ingredients in commercial feed for livestock contingent on approval by the federal government or AFCO. Requires the Department of Ag and Biosecurity to adopt rules, as well in quotes. The state attorney general was objecting to accepting the definition of AFCO, said they need government approval. FDA takes long. They're asking any suggestions on how the bill could be worded to allow the state to approve hemp feed pending FDA approval. I will say there's a couple individual states that have gotten hemp feed approval, Montana being one, Kentucky, I think, is another, blanking on some of the others. Bill, if you remember.
Yeah, and the real tragedy here is, with the inaction of the federal government, FDA giving us a clear pathway going back to Scott Gottlieb in 2018, states start to come up with their own requirements, rules, and they vary. So, we don't want to have, as an industry, wind up with 50 different sets of rules or interpretations of the rules, or, because when you even if you have acceptable parameters, Justin, you can comment on this if you want, but even if you have acceptable parameters within a state, if there's anything that comes in involving interstate commerce, that makes it federal, including packaging or anything else. Any component that comes in engaging in interstate commerce brings the federal government into the picture. So, unfortunately, it's the worst of all circumstances where states are trying to do the right things, but we don't have any unified efforts or consistency, and that needs to change. So hopefully, FDA and Congress will come up with a more reasonable and unified approach, because a patchwork approach just is unworkable and unacceptable in my view.
Yeah, so I was going to say that patchwork approvals and it just makes it more complicated. A singular federal standard is really the way to go. So with that, we're right on at 2:59, and I just have a quick announcement to wrap things up. If you have additional questions, anyone, feel free to reach out to the Hemp Feed Coalition. We can get those answered for you. But I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today. Go ahead and mark your calendars for the third Thursday of each month. That is when we have our next our HFC webinar scheduled for, is the third Thursday. So Thursday, March 19th. That webinar will begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, with our speaker being Ruggero Amato, and just a few other upcoming webinars or other hemp-related courses. Wednesday, February 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Cornell has their webinar. The topic is flower drying and quality, with their speaker, Caitlin Bridges from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And then the next 4 Tuesdays, the University of Vermont is hosting their fiber hemp production short course from 1 to 2:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure to tune into those if they are of any interest. And hopefully we will see you all guys again in a month's time for our next webinar. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.